I am Brecca Kramer, a volunteer member of Task Force 21 Minot. We engage with leaders out at the Minot Air Force Base, across Air Force Global Strike Command, and within the nation. And really our role is to ensure that the citizens and the communities and leaders understand the importance of strategic deterrence. The men and women that serve do an important part to protect our nation, and it's our role as citizens to make sure that the message and importance of strategic deterrence is out there in the community.
Welcome everyone to this session with General John Hyten, which is part of our Triad Conference, Seeking and Securing National Consensus on Nuclear Deterrence and Modernization. I'm Mark Janser, Chairman of Task Force 21 Minot. I'm here in Minot with John McMartin, the President of the Minot Chamber of Commerce, whom we will hear from later. Task Force 21 is an activity of the Minot Chamber of Commerce. Minot is proud to be the only base in the country to host two legs of our strategic triad, B-52 bombers and ICBM Minuteman III missiles. The purpose of Task Force 21 is to educate local, community, North Dakota, and members of Congress on public and national policy issues, particularly ones that affect Minot Air Force Base, the U.S. Air Force, and our nuclear deterrent. This is the 9th Triad Symposium that Task Force 21 has hosted in association with Peter Husey since September 2012. The purpose of these symposiums is to help build and sustain a consensus in Congress and in the public on the need to modernize all three legs of our nuclear triad. Now I'd like to introduce Peter Husey over in Washington, D.C. Peter?
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, John. And General Hyten, it's an honor to have you, and I really have you speak to us. And I want to thank you on behalf of all of us for taking the time out of what I know is a very, very busy schedule. General John Hyten, as everyone knows, is the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Before that, his position when he took in November 2019, he was Commander of the United States Strategic Command, where he led the nation's strategic capabilities, including all three legs of the nuclear triad, NC3, and had a major role in NSA work as well. He attended Harvard University on an Air Force Reserve Officer Training Corps scholarship, graduated in 1981 with a bachelor's degree in engineering and applied sciences, and was commissioned as second lieutenant. The general's career began in engineering and acquisition before transitioning to space operations. And now, General Hyten, on behalf of all of us, thank you for joining us today. Here are the questions, two questions I wanted you to address in your remarks. You told everyone that this mission, this nuclear triad mission, is a 20, probably 30-year effort. And our question is, what's the best way we can do to sustain that effort? The second question is, you've often used the phrase acquiring systems at the speed of relevance. I was wondering if you could explain to our audience what you mean by that and what kind of progress we have made. So with that, General, over to you. And again, thank you very much for joining us.
So thanks very much, Peter. Thanks to John and Mark as well. I can honestly tell John and Mark that this would be a whole lot more fun if I was in Minot. Minot is a pretty special place. I've never been stationed there, but I've been there, and I think at every time of the year at Minot has beauty and challenges all at once. But the amazing thing is it doesn't matter whether it's the cold of February or the heat and the flies of the summer. The folks that are up in the 5th and the 91st, they get the job done every day. They are truly remarkable. And I'll talk about the people of the nuclear business here in a little while. But if you want to see two legs of the triad in one place that does it really well, go to Minot Air Force Base. So thanks to Team Minot for what you do for our nation, what you do for the airmen that live and work up there. It is a challenging place, but it's also a very special place. So thanks very much. So I have been the vice chairman for, over 9 months now. It's hard to believe that time has gone by so fast. Of course, I never thought we'd be in the middle of COVID for most of that time. That has certainly changed things. That's one of the reasons why we're here in the Pentagon and not out in the field. That's why we wear masks everywhere we go, all the things that come with that. But nonetheless, this is a really important topic, and I appreciate the chance. Not just because I was the commander of STRATCOM, but because this is important to the nation. So to go after the two topics right up front that you said, and then I'll broaden it, but really for the audience, I hope this audience, as much as any other, understands two things are critical to the security of this nation. Number one, we have to have a triad. It has to be modernized. It has to be effective each and every day to keep the peace, to deter our adversaries. And in order to have that happen effectively, we have to modernize it at the speed of relevance, which means it has to be modernized in time to replace the old stuff before it goes out of date. It's really that simple, and that's all we're here to talk about. So when you look at my job as the vice chairman, when I look at my job as the vice chairman, I have three fairly simple priorities. Priority number one is to make sure that I support my bosses, and that means the chairman, the secretary of defense, and the president of the United States. It's kind of strange. I never expected to be in the Air Force beyond 4 years, and now that above me in the chain of command is just those three people. That's pretty much it. And so my first job is to make sure that they are supported, and I give my best military advice on whatever the issue is. So to be honest, over the first 9 months, that's taken most of my time because the world has been very dynamic. I've chaired with the Deputy Secretary of Defense the DoD COVID Task Force, involved in the White House Task Force for a long time, to make sure we do everything we can as a department to support the country, to support the world in dealing with this pandemic is important. But there's also important in the nuclear business and the nuclear capabilities. And that is, and the president has stated it, the nuclear posture review, his nuclear posture review states it. Our defense strategy states it. The number one priority of this department is strategic deterrence, and strategic deterrence starts with the nuclear triad. And so we have to maintain its readiness, we have to maintain its support, and we have to modernize it. And every message and every document out of this department talks about that. It really makes the military advice in that area pretty straightforward, since everybody above me is aligned on the criticality of that. Doesn't matter whether you're the chairman, secretary, ESPER, or the president of the United States. Everybody is aligned on that. My second priority is to work hard in everything that we do here in the Joint Staff and everything I do as the vice chairman to insert speed into everything we do as a Department of Defense. Because in many ways, we've lost the ability to move fast. We've been very deliberate, very slow in responding to threats as they start to manifest themselves and appear. And it really has been that way intentionally. It's not that we just fell into it accidentally, because we were, in many ways, so far ahead of the rest of the world with our military capabilities that we wanted to make sure as we modernize those capabilities, we made no mistakes. And if you want to have a structure as large as the Department of Defense and a mission as complex as building weapon systems for the future, and you don't want to make a mistake, the only way to do that is to go slow and make sure every step of the process is studied and analyzed, and every decision comes to committees, and committees make those decisions, and then we slowly move forward. The problem with that is that if you have competitors, adversaries that are watching what you do and they decide to move fast, you can be in a world of hurt. And we're not there yet, but we're on the path to being challenged as a military. China is moving unbelievably fast across the board, across their military enterprise as well as their nuclear capabilities. Russia is building nuclear capabilities fast. They're building not just modernization of the triad, but they're building nuclear-powered cruise missiles, nuclear-powered torpedoes, a vast variety of low-yield nuclear weapons that can be deployed in many different ways to challenge the United States. So we have to be able to move, again, at the speed of relevance, and that means we have to put speed in everything that we do. In order to put speed in everything that we do, that means we have to delegate authorities down, and we have to start taking a little more risk. Not stupid risk, but risk in order to move fast. We have to let generals and colonels make decisions. We have to delegate things down to our younger officers and our non-commissioned officers and allow them to make decisions and move out in order for us to be able to move fast. That's going to be a significant challenge. In order for us to do that effectively, we have to empower that level of leadership. And that means when we look at the Pentagon processes, the Pentagon process have to be structured in a way that gives the people that I just described the authority to make decisions. And we haven't been doing that for a couple of decades now. So in the area that I have some control over, and that's the JROC, since I am the chairman of the JROC as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I sit with the 4 service chiefs, 4 vice service chiefs, soon the 5th, which will be the Space Force vice chief, and then as well as the National Guard. And we have to look together across the enterprise and figure out how to move quicker in terms of requirements. So we're going to do a number of things. Number one, we're not going to micromanage the service in terms of the service requirements. If it's a service requirement, we'll delegate to the services and allow them to move quickly. Congress has directed us to do that. They've delegated authorities down on the acquisition side. We need to match that on the requirement side, and then we need to do something a little bit different. But that's something that the JROC, the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, has been tasked with since it was created in the 90s. And if you look back at the original tasking that Congress gave us, which they've emphasized over the last few years in different pieces of legislation, we're supposed to develop and drive joint requirements out to the services. So joint requirements are going to be developed and approved by the JROC, and then the JROC process, the different boards under the JROC will hold the services accountable for meeting those joint requirements. But we're not going to micromanage the services approach to meeting that. On the nuclear side, that means service capabilities or the services to figure out how to build. But if they have to meet a joint interface, they have to come to the JROC. So when I first looked out at the nuclear enterprise, when I was really studying it in depth as I was about to become the commander of STRATCOM, and I was being prepared very well by the Joint Staff for my confirmation hearing back in 2016, I was advised, I was going to say directed, but it was really advised to study the Big Four, to study the new submarine, Columbia, that'll replace Ohio, to study the new ICBM, GBSD, the ground-based strategic deterrent that'll replace Minuteman III, to study the new long-range standoff weapon that'll replace the Air-Launched Cruise Missile, LRSO to replace Alchem, and to study the B-21, the new bomber, the Raider that will replace the B-2. If I understood those 4 capabilities, I would be able to handle any programmatic issues that Congress brought up to me. And they were right. As I went through my discussions with members of the Senate and in my hearing, I got lots of questions on those 4 programs. I understood them well enough to answer them effectively and was confirmed. But when I got to STRATCOM, and as I've gone along, and now as the vice chairman, I've realized that if you just work those 4 programs, it's insufficient to deliver the capabilities that we need for the future. You have to work those 4 programs along with the command and control necessary to deliver that. And so our nuclear command and control and communications, NC3, has to be modernized as well. And then you have to have the weapons to go on top, because you can have the most powerful nuclear submarine ever built with effective Trident sea-launched ballistic missiles. And if you don't have a weapon to go on top, it is not a deterrent to an adversary. And working with NNSA and the Department of Energy, we realized that we had taken our eye off the weapons enterprise, and at STRATCOM we realized we'd taken our eyes off the nuclear command and control piece as well. So we put focus back on each of those. And now when I talk about the Big Four, I actually talk about the Big Six, because it has to be all those. So that is the crux of the triad. The crux of the triad, modernization, is the Big Four platforms combined with the legacy B-52, don't forget about that because it has to be re-engined and modernized as well, along with the weapons and the command and control capabilities we need to have in order to do that. If we can develop those capabilities, we will have an effective nuclear deterrent for the rest of the century, really, and that's the length of time we're looking at in the future. Now, there's a couple other things that nuclear posture review talked about because of specific things that Russia has been doing that we believe we need adjunct capabilities for besides the triad. And those were pretty simple, and they were pretty straightforward, and they were really directed against the Russian threat. Number one was a low-yield nuclear weapon to be deployed on our ballistic missile submarines. And we have now built that and deployed it. Number two was a sea-launched cruise missile to challenge new capabilities that Russia has developed and deploying as well in order to deter Russia and make sure that those weapons never are used against us either. Because when it comes right down to it, the role of nuclear weapons in our inventory is to make sure that nobody ever uses nuclear weapons on us. And to do that, you have to respond in kind to challenges that competitors bring to you. So we have to look closely at China, closely at Russia. This is not just a capabilities environment. This is a threat-based environment, and we have to understand what those things are. And that's why we're starting down the path of building a sea-launched cruise missile as well. It would be a great day if someday in the future we could sit down with China and Russia and have effective arms control discussions as the three great nuclear powers of the world and figure out where things have to go. We've actually had some pretty productive conversations with Russia the last couple months, and that's been good to see because the New START treaty expires in February 21, and I would like to see something there to replace it or a continuation with further agreement to continue to talk about nuclear weapons in the future. I think that's critically important. But the bottom line is the United States military's job is to deter our adversaries. And if you think about this year, it's been a pretty significant year because it's 75 years since the only atomic weapons have been deployed in anger on this planet. And it was just last month that we celebrated the 75th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And celebrate is probably not the best term because it really changed the world for a long time. But I use that term intentionally because for the last 75 years, great power war has been eliminated from the planet. Not war, but great power conflict. Great power war has been eliminated. And that's been eliminated in great part by our strategic deterrent that has focused on eliminating that great power war. And if you look back at the history of the world, 75 years is a very, very long period without great power war. In fact, I think I looked it up the other day. I think there's only one other period, and then you have to go back almost to the Middle Ages to find a period longer than that when the great powers of the world were not at war sometime during that. So 75 years is an enormous amount of time. And then if you look at the impacts of that, because in World War II alone, between the year 1939 and 1945, the world killed somewhere between 60 and 80 million people in World War II. And if you do the math and you add that up, that's about 30,000 people a day being killed in World War II. 30,000 people a day. You compare that to our experience in Vietnam, and Vietnam was a tough period for this nation. In that decade-long struggle with Vietnam, our nation lost some of our greatest treasures. 58,000 of our sons and daughters lost their lives in that conflict, and you see their names on the wall in the Vietnam Memorial in this town. And it's sobering when you walk by that. And I've walked by it a lot because it reminds me to try to never let that happen again and do everything I can to make sure we keep the peace in the world. But in that conflict of a decade, that's 2 days of World War II. 2 days of World War II. And nuclear capabilities have prevented that kind of mass casualties. And that's important for the security of the world as we go into the future. So I can't see nuclear weapons going away. I think that we can continue to have effective arms control with our fellow nuclear powers. But they're not going to go away until something can replace a nuclear weapon. Because other than that, we'll be back in the world of World War II. And that's a world I don't want to be in. So I've talked about my two priorities. The first one, providing advice. You see how that aligns pretty simply to the ability to advise the president, the secretary, and the chairman on nuclear capabilities. Number two, inserting speed. That's hard to do, so I talked about that a lot. But number three, I don't want to forget that, because number three is taking care of our people. Because as amazing as the capabilities are, we're nothing without the people. And I think Team Minot understands that as well as anybody in the world. Without the people that we have, the sailors on the nuclear submarines, the developers and maintainers across the Air Force and the Navy, the airmen that sit in nuclear alert at Minot, at Malmstrom, at F.E. Warren, the bombers at Barksdale, Whiteman, and Minot. Without those servicemen and women, we are nothing. And right now, as you go out and visit any of the elements of our nuclear triad on alert today, you'll find some pretty amazing things, because you'll find morale very high. And that wasn't the case 10 or 15 years ago. It was not. And it was not for a simple reason. It's because I think our nation forgot the importance, the criticality, the highest priority mission that we have to do, and that's our nuclear deterrent. And when you did that, it translated down into our force. And people didn't understand that they were doing the most important mission of the country asked them to do. And so now when you go out, the sailors and the airmen of the nuclear force understand they are doing the most important mission our nation can ask for. And they're starting to see improved capabilities show up as well. The capabilities that we have, again, are nothing without our people. And the morale is high, but that morale is fragile as well. And I say that advisedly, because I know that many of those people are watching right now. But the reason I say it's fragile is because we have made a commitment to those young sailors and airmen that we will give them the newest and best capabilities so they can continue to do the most important mission that their nation has ever asked anybody to do. And in order to do that, they have to see those capabilities show up. And so it's our responsibility to make sure they show up. We have to deliver those capabilities, and we have to deliver them on time. Not just because it's essential for the timing, because the old stuff's going out and the new stuff's got to come in. That's all true. But we've made a promise, a commitment to the operators of these systems, and they need to see that stuff start showing up. So what are we doing? We're putting all hands on deck to deliver those capabilities. The Secretary has asked me multiple times, and the Commander of Stratcom, Admiral Richard, multiple times, and the Undersecretary for Acquisition Logistics multiple times, to figure out everything that we can do in two areas. Number one, to add margin in our current capabilities and add margin to the programs that we're going to deliver. Because when we put everything on the table, when I got to the Pentagon 9 months ago and put it in front of the Secretary and everything delivered just in time, he said, if that's the most important mission of the Department of Defense, that can't stand. So we need to do everything we can to take our current stuff and try to squeeze some extra time out of it. And we need to do everything we can with the stuff that's coming in the future to squeeze everything we can to the left. I actually don't like to move programs to the left. I just like to put margin in schedule so we can deliver those on time. If we can do those things, then we'll live up to the commitment we've made to the sailors and airmen that operate the nuclear enterprise, and we'll deliver the capabilities on time that will allow this country to stay safe as we move into the future. So Peter, Mark, John, those are my prepared remarks. I appreciate the time to talk to you, to talk to the conference. I'm sorry we have to do it virtually, but I know we have 15 or 20 minutes for questions as well. And so I cede the time back to you for any questions you want to ask me. Over.
Well, thank you very much, General Hyten. As usual, your remarks are very informative and helpful. I have two questions, but they're related, so you can answer them together. You've often mentioned, you were one of the first people to mention that Mr. Putin's new strategy of what you called escalate to win was the threat to use nuclear weapons early in a crisis or even in a conventional conflict. But on top of that, there's another issue, and that is what often is not discussed is the need for a very strong extended deterrent of the United States and our allies over NATO and East Asia. And I want you to address the two together, how Mr. Putin's strategy impacts on extended deterrent and what we're doing in our force structure and modernization to address that.
So when you look at the Russian strategy, you have to look at it from a nuclear perspective in totality of everything they're doing in the their nuclear enterprise, which means modernization of the triad across the board, which means development of new strategic weapons that aren't accountable under the New START Treaty, some hypersonics that are accountable under the New START Treaty, and then the low-yield nuclear weapons across the board. And therefore, the United States has to develop capabilities to make sure that any adversary, Russia in this case, never can reach the point where they consider, I can use a weapon, whether that's large or small, I can use a weapon and the United States will not have the will or capability to respond. That can never happen. That always has to be there, which is why the Nuclear Posture Review clearly states we need the capabilities we do based on the triad, plus the low-yield nuclear weapon, plus the sea-launched cruise missile. Because if we have those, the adversary, in this case the Russians, will look at us and never reach the point where they think using a nuclear weapon, they can get away with it, period. And it's really that simple. Now, what does that mean for extended deterrence? What that means for extended deterrence is that across the world, whether that's Europe, Asia, our allies, wherever they are, we have made commitments to our allies that if they are attacked with a nuclear weapon, our extended deterrence will apply to them. And that means if a nuclear weapon is used against our allies, we have the ability to respond effectively and deal with that. And if we do have the ability to respond effectively, just like I just described from a U.S. perspective, that deterrence now applies to our allies as well. It's really that simple. Deterrence hasn't changed since Herman Kahn and Thomas Schelling. The basics haven't. The means have changed, but the basics haven't. And the basics are the ability to impose cost on an adversary, to deny benefit to that adversary, and to message it effectively so they understand it. And part of what we're doing here today is delivering that message, is that whatever you think, you cannot use a nuclear weapon against the United States or our allies without us having a means to respond. In line with the law of armed conflict, proportionately, effectively, we will respond, and that means our allies don't have to build any of their own. Over.
Well, before I ask another question, I want to turn it over to my dear friends Mark and John and see, do you have any questions for the general that you would like to put forward?
Yes, Peter, this is John. Thank you, General Hyten. The National Security Commission of 2018 called for the U.S. to get its intellectual national security house in order and train a cadre of professionals that can think through nuclear security challenges as we face as a country. Do you think it would be valuable to create a graduate school agenda program devoted to this task?
So you broke up at the very end, Mark. Could you repeat the last sentence, please?
Sure. Do you think it would be valuable to create a graduate school agenda / program devoted to this task?
So yes, I do. So I'll refer you to the Stratcom program when they developed an academic alliance. So Stratcom has reached out to multiple universities, multiple think tanks, and is working with those universities to develop research programs, educational programs, as well as graduate programs to focus on this area. And there's been some success coming out of that. I think we need to aggressively continue to pursue that because I refer you back to where the great nuclear thinkers came from in the late 50s, early 60s. The great thinkers came then. If you look at Kahn and Schelling, it's a good example because you can see university connections and think tank connections. Kahn from Rand, Schelling at Yale, and then you see the the entire enterprise that they built that extended in through Henry Kissinger and a number of others that came out of the think tanks and the universities. That's not to mean that we don't have independent thinkers in the United States military. We do. And we use our war colleges and we use fellowships at universities to encourage research in those areas, and we get tremendous research out of those. But fundamentally, and I was a fellow at the University of Illinois and got to write on conflict with China, and it was a very informative period for me, and I enjoyed it. And some people have picked that paper up and read it over the years. That's all good. But when that year was over, I went back to doing the business of the Department of Defense, the business of the Air Force, the business of the nation. The thing about universities and think tanks is that after a year, they keep working and they keep expanding, they keep thinking, and they keep learning. So having focused graduate programs, focused fellowships on this topic, I think is important for our nation and the world, because 21st century deterrence, although the fundamentals are the same, because the means are different, it's very different. It's a multi-domain problem now. It's a multipolar problem now. It used to be bipolar and nuke on nuke. That was all you had to worry about. Now you have to worry about many countries, and you have to worry about space and cyber and conventional and chem bio and a number of other different things you have to worry about. So it is a very different world, although the fundamentals are the same. So we need new research and new thought. And if we can get that in the universities and the think tanks, that's hugely valuable to the nation. Thanks for the question, Mark.
Thank you.
General again on deterrence, I believe that earlier this year you testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee that the threat of retaliation was the best and perhaps the only method of keeping the risk of hypersonic weapons in check. Could you comment on the emergence of these hypersonics in terms of U.S. nuclear force structure and modernization?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting thing to look at from the perspective of the United States and China and Russia. And I'll just say that we're all looking at hypersonics. And you would expect any military of any great power to always look at the next advent in technology, whether that's from the musket to the rifle, from the Jeep to the tank, from the prop plane to the fighter, whatever it is, you're always going to look at the next. And so we're all looking at hypersonics. And that's important. It'll be a very important part of our future force structure, and it's something that we'll have to think about how to employ and then deter the employment of against us. But the biggest difference in our approach to hypersonics and the Russian and Chinese approach to hypersonics is we have not tied our hypersonic program to our nuclear capabilities in any way. If you look at the nuclear posture review and our deterrent plan for what it takes in order to deter nuclear capabilities being used against us, you won't see nuclear hypersonic programs as a requirement. Now, it doesn't mean we couldn't go down that path. I mean, that's just a different warhead on top of something. But our future force structure plan only looks at conventional hypersonic capabilities. Our adversaries are looking at changing the game using hypersonics against us. But they should know that we'll have the capability to see whatever they do, and we'll be able to respond in kind with our deterrent. And if they employ nuclear weapons against us, it doesn't matter what avenue it comes through, we're going to be able to respond effectively. That will allow us to deter them. When it comes to hypersonics from our strategic deterrent perspective, my biggest demand signal is not on a hypersonic weapon capability. My biggest demand signal is for a hypersonic sensor capability. Because if we can see it, then we have the ability to deter it. Because if we see it and it's coming at us, if we have to, we can respond in kind, and because we can do that, we can deter the threat. You also can conceptually develop the ability to defend it if you can see it. But if you can't see it, you can't deter it and you can't defend it. So having that sensor capability, which I believe is a global capability best accomplished from space, from lower altitudes other than geosynchronous orbit, is the best way to get after that. So it's interesting to look at the nation's approach to hypersonics, and they're different. but we're all going down that path. Thanks very much, John.
General, let me ask you a question. It's come up quite frequently over the last number of years, most recently in a book by former Secretary of Defense Bill Perry, and that is that we unilaterally eliminate the land-based leg of the triad, number one. Number two, reduce the number of submarines by at least 2, and not deploy the air-launched new long-range strike option or cruise missile. You know the arguments, but what I'm wanted to get from you is what would be the impact if the United States did any or all of those things, particularly if we did them unilaterally?
So from my perspective, and I've given this as military advice to my commander-in-chief, as well as to the Congress when asked, is that would significantly degrade the ability of the United States to deter the use of nuclear weapons against us. And it's real simple, because if you go down to where you're just looking at a small number of submarines, that is our only nuclear deterrent, then you're a technical failure or an intelligence failure or a mechanical failure away from losing your entire nuclear enterprise. And then the adversary on the other side can say, well, I'll have the opportunity to change the equation. That's a bad deterrent posture. Now, if you want to go at it from a political perspective, that's fine. You can think about different policies and different politics that would do that. But from a military perspective, which is my job, is I can't deter unless I can guarantee I have a response to an attack. If I guarantee I have a response to an attack, then I'm confident that I'm deterring my adversary. And if I can't, then the deterrence can fail. And if we take away those capabilities, I think we're in a position where deterrence can fail and ultimately will fail. And I can, if this was a classified forum, I could walk you through a number of different aspects where I've seen the potential impacts of various things happening and how the triad prevents us from ever losing a deterrent.
Interesting. John or Mark, do you have another question for the general?
I don't have anything as a follow-up at this point.
No, I think I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Again,
Go ahead.
do you have another question?
Yeah, I just have one brief one, and I think we'll let the general go. General, as you know, there's a tension between arms control that's possible with an adversary that doesn't particularly want to come to the table, and what we need to do with strategic modernization. A number of people have suggested, including myself, that we might want to look to limit the number of multiple warheads on land-based missiles. We did ban them under START 2, but the Russian Duma didn't ratify it in that form. Others have suggested that the idea of incentivizing people to move to sea or also to have more on the bomber leg is more stabilizing. Can you address, I know it's a little bit out of your lane, but could you address what kind of arms control you'd like to see perhaps the United States pursue in the future as a subsequent to New START, but something that would lead to probably, as opposed to just reducing numbers, of having more stabilizing force structure?
So the arms control I'd like to see in the future is stable and verifiable. It's really that simple. I'd like to get to a stability regime where we understand with the other nuclear powers what capabilities we have and what capabilities they have. They're roughly equivalent. With nuclear capabilities, roughly equivalent is good enough. It doesn't have to be exactly equivalent. It just has to be roughly equivalent. With that kind of capability and an ability to verify those capabilities under the treaty, whatever the verification regime is, it has to be verifiable across the enterprise. Then it's very easy for the nuclear powers to maintain stability. And stability is critical when you talk about nuclear capabilities long into the future. And that can allow continued discussions of arms control that can get us to smaller numbers. Although I never see, at least for the foreseeable future, I have a hard time envisioning significantly smaller numbers, but there is room for negotiation there. But it has to be with all the nuclear powers, with everything on the table, and it has to talk about rough equivalents for stability and then a verification regime that allows us to see what each other is doing. And I don't have a problem with a verification regime that allows the Russians to come and look at pretty much anything we have. I don't care. They can look down in every silo at Minot. Don't care. You know, we are a transparent society, and what we say is there, and I don't mind anybody coming to look at it, whether it's the Chinese or the Russian. That's fine. But if we do that, we need to be allowed to come see what they have as well, to make sure that they are being transparent and honest in everything that they do. So that's all we're trying to get to when we come about it. In order to do that, we have to put everything on the table, and that includes multiple warheads, that includes a number of different things, and be willing to talk about it, because the key is stability that is verifiable.
Again,
General.
thank you, General Hyten, for taking time to speak to us today. We appreciate your insights and thank you for your service. To everyone who has viewed this video, I also urge you to watch the rest of the presentations on our agenda. They cover a range of topics and are truly extraordinary. Please plan to join us in person next year. We expect to be back to normal then with a live presentation during the fall of 2021 in Washington, D.C. Again, thank you, General Hyten.
General Hyten, on behalf of myself and my two dear friends, it's an honor to have you come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And again, I wish I was there. Maybe next year it'll work out different. I'll get back up to Minot, and we can have a more lengthy interchange and maybe a beverage or two to talk about these things. That would be great as we look forward in the future. And I can tell you that I'm confident that 2021 is going to be better than 2020. But everything we do starts from our nuclear deterrence. So Peter, Mark, John, thank you very much for allowing me to do this today. And it is really a good agenda. So I hope people pay attention. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you very much.
Here.
All right, out here.
Out here. Thank you, General.